information has been distorted. Well, religion begins when the human species knows nothing and is in its infancy and is very terrified but wants to know what's going on and why are we here, what put us here and what's going on. They don't know there's a germ theory of disease. They think that plagues are caused by curses or wickedness or something of the sort. They don't know we live on a cooling planet that was molten until quite fairly recently in historical times. So earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, terrifying, wondrous, mystifying, have to be explained. They come up with a junk explanation. They don't know the Earth is round. They don't know it circulates around the sun. Indeed, they later resist, in the degenerate stage of religion, they resist any discovery that alters their first finding. They can't bear it. They can't have their cosmology altered. So it comes from a time when we were really lethally ignorant, and when people died young and horribly and in childbirth and needlessly and of disease and so on. Now, my argument is that we should just grow out of that. We should realize this was the best, or the most, perhaps I should say, we could do then. But it needs to be transcended now. And now, believing in illusions of this kind, believing that AIDS is God's punishment, as Jerry Falwell said, for example, as the Pope sort of implies, believing that God is on your side when you blow yourself up in an attempt to murder a schoolyard full of children or a teacher training school for women. This is now no longer just a condemnation of the ideology that leads to it, the religious ideology, but it's a real threat to civilization.
Christopher Hitchens' book is somewhat different, I think, than the previous 3 or 4 books that have become a big subject of conversation the last year or so, Sam Harris's book included. Christopher, they tend to try to prove that God does not exist, which seems to me a nearly impossible task. You don't take that approach at all.
No, I don't. I mean, it cannot be demonstrated that God does not exist. Not even Einstein was willing to say that he could do that. Indeed, he thought there might be a pantheism where God is everything and, in that sense, to some extent, nothing. He was absolutely sure there was no God that intervened, took an interest in our affairs or answered prayers or anything of that kind. He was a follower, really, of the teachings of Baruch Spinoza, who I consider to be the greatest philosopher who ever lived. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He thought that the order and beauty of the universe suggested some kind of, if not designer, maybe architect, first cause. We have better information about that now. All the arguments for the existence of God have been discredited in one form or another, or replaced. Doesn't mean that there's a disproof. I also think that the argument was complete in its own terms before Darwin and before Einstein. In ancient Athens, before monotheism moved in to try and destroy philosophy and Hellenism, Epicurus and Democritus had worked out, and Lucretius had publicized the fact. How they found this out, I'd love to know. But the universe is made of atoms. They knew that somehow, and that if there are gods, they don't waste their time intervening in our quarrels. That's ancient wisdom. We lost it. It came back through Galileo, with Galileo, came back through Newton. Even Newton quoted Lucretius, through the philosophy of Spinoza, through Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Voltaire, the French and American Enlightenments. Culminates, I think, with Einstein. But that means we have a better tradition than those who go yearning for the human sacrifices and the temples and the rituals and the circumcisions and the incense and all this barbaric, primitive stuff from the infancy of the species.
I quickly went through the internet, as you would expect me to do, looking at the people who had taken the book on and looking at the arguments. And they seem to come down to a central argument. And before we take phone calls, I want you to confront that argument. And that is that while you may make a solid argument here, and that you may have a long laundry list of things that religion has done that to destroy humankind and a lot of other things, that you do not take into account the good things. You do not balance those things. How do you answer that?
Well, I do in fact take that on in the book. I take the best known example in American folklore of Dr. Martin Luther King, for example. Say, well, wasn't he a great man and wasn't he a believer in God? And didn't he do a lot of good? And I say, well, look, the 3 things. First, we don't know what his own opinion was on this. We know it would have been very dangerous for him to say that he didn't believe in God. at that time and in that place. And we know he did study Marx and Hegel, and that he was attacked all the time for having secular, atheist, socialist, and Marxist friends, which he did. So I would not say I knew his mind, but I'm not going to say that anyone else knew it either. I certainly know that if you wanted to be smart at that time, why not use Christian rhetoric? Because the racists and the bigots and the reactionaries of the South, they can't impeach that, because they rule in the name of that idea.
Correct, yeah.
They say it's a Christian society.
Yeah.
Very clever, satirical, ironic of him to be able to turn that back on them. The black secularists like Bayard Rustin and Philip Randolph, who actually organized the March on Washington, didn't say God wants a March on Washington. God wants the passage of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. Exodus mandates it. Because it doesn't, apart from anything else. They said, no, the Constitution says this is illegal, and we want it changed. That's all you need to say. You don't require any supernatural invocation. And third, I would add that this attempt, mainly made by the way, condescending white liberals, to say that somehow black America has to be spiritual in its leadership and in its rhetoric. Fine, maybe in the case of Dr. King, who was an exemplary human being, but they've handed the whole thing over since to frauds and charlatans of the deepest dye, like Jesse Jackson,
who shoved
Al Sharpton,
that Reverend
who
in
get
front,
away with murder because they can put the name Reverend before their names.
Very
so
interesting.
no, I don't know of any contribution made by a religious person to, say, resistance to fascism or overthrow of British rule of India or ending of racism and slavery in America that hadn't already been made completely and clearly by a secular person before that.
Christopher Hitchens, the guest, at 3:28 on the Pete Wilson program on KGO. A number of people on the line. We'll take those phone calls when we get back from our news break. This is KGO. Thank you, Greg. Back on the Pete Wilson program at 3:33 with Christopher Hitchens. God is Not Great. It is from 12 books, and we'll make it available on the KGO book line at 1-800-801-BOOK. A couple of appearances. All this information on my program summaries on the KGO website. He'll be at Kepler's Books tomorrow in Palo Alto at 12 noon, and at Book Passage tomorrow night in Corte Madera, that at 7 o'clock, and probably not on this subject. I assume that the Berkeley event tonight at 7:30 with Chris Hedges is about Iraq. Will that
No,
be
no,
are
no,
you going to talk about this?
No, it's about religion.
Okay, I just assume with Hedges there.
No, and in all cases, and thank you for mentioning it, all of those cases, be there or be square. No, it's a discussion about the role of faith in all
Terrific.
three venues.
So again, that's tonight at 7:30, King Middle School Auditorium in North Berkeley. Again, that information on my program summaries. Before I go to these phones, very quickly, and it has nothing to do with this book particularly. I'm fascinated by what you do, and the way that you do this. Carter says something at 10 o'clock in the morning, and Hitchens has written something that is cogent and I think to the point, I don't know, by noon. What sort of a day is this? I mean, you are everywhere these days. People want you on their programs to talk about these things because you're simply terrific at confrontation and discussion and debate. Do you ever get away from this for even 5 minutes?
No, it's a losing struggle, I'm afraid, but one can't quit it. I wanted to give up politics and all of that, go back to literature. In the year 2000, I remember resolving to do it once I'd finished my Orwell book. I'll get all husky and moist if I go on like this, but I wanted to write about Marcel Proust, and I finished my first marking up of La Recherche de Temps Perdu on, I think, September the 9th, 2001, something like that.
It's one thing to refer to...
And I got a call from my wife that day. It said, it looks as if the Proust is on hold now.
I mean, it's one thing to quote from Proust and Spinoza and Lenin and Marx and Engels and these classic... There are people in here I've never heard of, quite frankly. and it's just an extraordinary...
But I should add, and you're much too kind, but I mean, if you can't trash Jimmy Carter before lunchtime, you shouldn't be in this business at all. And that wasn't a matter of having 2 hours to spare. It was a matter of having watched him for years and seen what a complete gaping fraud he was.
It's just extraordinary that he actually thought for a moment that he had somebody who was a worse president than he is, or was. And I said that I think that Bush is the worst president of my lifetime, but Carter comes awfully close to that, and it's extraordinary for him to get into that discussion.
And then he wants to say he's such a half-wit and and a cringe